Christian Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Women We've Been Waiting For, a 40-day devotional for self-care, resilience, and communal flourishing by Tiffany Bluhm. Narrated by Tiffany Bluhm. To the women who have gone before us, the ones who have dismantled systems that made no room for our flourishing, may we glean from your lives well lived. Preface. In this devotional, I intertwine formation practices and stories of renewal. As you listen, I ask you to consider how our flourishing is the result of a lifelong walk with the God of Mary and Hagar, Deborah and Esther, Naomi and Elizabeth. Scripture, stories, insights, prayers, and questions to ponder are tucked into each entry of The Women We've Been Waiting For, in hopes of encouraging you to lean on the divine as you seek refreshment for yourself and for others. The women who contributed to this devotional are treasured voices I listen to, women who have challenged me to think differently about the Creator. These are formidable women whose unique expressions of the gospel have beckoned me to live a beautiful story without bending to the demands of grind culture or the will of whiteness. They are my sisters, women of integrity who spend their lives inviting others to take their place at the table while pursuing the upside-down kingdom. I pray that as you immerse yourself in the stories of the women in this devotional, you'll be transformed, challenged, and convicted by the divine. I pray that you will gain insight into yourself in their rage, their frustration, their losses, their audacity, their hopes, their desires, and their victories. They wanted what we all long for, renewal and refreshment. May their longing be our reality as we faithfully pursue repentance, solidarity, formation, and liberation. Part 1. Matriarchs of the Past. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. Audre Lorde. 1. Holy and whole. May God Himself, the God who makes everything holy and whole, make you holy and whole, put you together, spirit, soul, and body, and keep you fit for the coming of our Master, Jesus Christ. The one who called you is completely dependable. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 23, the Message. In an age when girl boss meritocracy and white feminism are glorified at the expense of all women flourishing, we have much to learn from the thread of communal renewal weaved through the stories of our minority sisters in history. These image bearers who've gone before us demanded civil and human rights when the status quo failed to address their needs. They cast aside a system not built for them and challenged the norms, and in some cases, downright evil, of their time and place. Countless Black, Indigenous, and women of color, as well as those with disabilities, bear a lineage stained by oppression, racism, sexism, othering, and traumas of the very worst kind. Yet our matriarchs and mothers, aunties and abuelas, amas and amas, embodied goodness and tenacity in their honest quest for survival. So do we. Their spirit of resilience runs through our veins, and like them, we know goodness is our birthright. The one who makes everything holy and whole makes us holy and whole, and in turn, we push for wholeness in our world. Perhaps the matriarchs with complicated backstories have the most for us to glean from, as their very lives were often on the line as they navigated the difficulties that came their way. In Joshua chapter 2, before the Israelites colonized Jericho, Joshua sent 2 spies to scope out the land. These spies found protection in the unlikely form of a woman called Rahab. Engaged in the oldest profession and the head of her household, Rahab shrewdly made a deal with the Israelite spies to spare herself and her family in exchange for her aid. Additionally, she prophesied, as Deborah did before her, the Israelites' victory over Canaanite territory. Rahab's unique geolocation on the outskirts of the city, reserved for the lowborn and outcasts, positioned her perfectly to aid the Israelite spies. As someone with a disreputable occupation and no way to rise above her station, she brokered this deal that brought safety and security for herself and her extended family in a time and place when few things could. Her belief in the God of Israel led her to risk everything with this treasonous act. And when Israel conquered Jericho, her female-led household was grafted into the new socio-political order of Israel. A Canaanite woman engaged in prostitution, a triple deficit, is the fearless mouthpiece of what's to come for Israel and is a matriarch named in the lineage of Jesus. Her actions were motivated not by meritocracy or a lick of girl boss energy, but by a fierce commitment to care for herself and her family in a place that did not. Rahab's account teaches us that our approach to renewal first begins with identifying our non-negotiable values, what we will and won't tolerate. That's self-care. Arguably, self-care equips us for social change. When I refer to self-care, I'm not referring to the $1.5 trillion industry that hawks bubble baths and yoga retreats marketed to us by capitalistic machines who wish to profit from our perceived deficiencies. Rather, it's looking out for ourselves in a world that does not. Author Julia Lee's description of self-care hits the nail on the head. She says that it's treating yourself as human in a world that dehumanizes you. Self-care is living as worthy of respect and rest simply because you exist and not because you've accomplished something extraordinary to deserve such an existence. Women's health psychiatrist Dr. Pooja Lakshman says that self-care is a verb, a commitment to live by your guiding principles in your everyday decision-making. It's proactive rather than reactive. Self-care is inherently subjective, and we'd be wise to allow others to grow in their own time and place as they consider their history, culture, and wounds. Self-care for social change is developed when we build healthy boundaries, hold paradoxes, consider what we believe, and evolve in our becoming for the betterment of ourselves and others. Within our commitment to follow the Creator is a measure of self-denial, but this is not at odds with our actualized self-care. These two things work together to forge an embodied life of deep trust in the divine and wise decision-making that centers the flourishing of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. If we're to love our neighbor as ourselves, as Jesus told his followers in Mark chapter 12, the implied command is to care for ourselves. Rahab knew caring for herself meant bucking societal standards and refusing to honor unjust systems. We aren't promised everything will bend our way because we take care of ourselves and others, and will likely never be in a position to broker a deal with foreign spies. But the woman we become along the way noble and humble, unapologetic and empathetic, that's the woman the world has been waiting for. Prayer. God of Rahab, make me holy and whole. Giver of life, strengthen my spirit, soul, and body. Declaration. I'm becoming the woman I've waited for, noble and humble, unapologetic and empathetic. Questions to ponder. How do you define self-care? How can you connect the dots in your own life from self-care to social change? 2. Last at the cross. And many women were there watching from a distance, who had followed Jesus from Galilee while caring for him. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. Matthew chapter 27, verse 55 through 56. New American Standard Bible. What happens when we can't fix another person's pain? When no amount of prayer or protective measures prevents the awful, the unthinkable, the tragic? When the prognosis or plan ends in loss? What then is our obligation to ourselves and those we love? In the case of the women at the cross, their worst nightmare had become their reality. Their beloved Jesus hung before them, seemingly helpless and clearly in pain. Most of the men had fled out of fear of arrest, imprisonment, or even a death sentence of their own. But not these women. They remained, despite the Romans' willingness to crucify women too. They were in close enough proximity that Jesus was able to address his mother and instruct her on who would take care of her. John chapter 19, verse 26. Although they had nothing to gain and no way to stop the proverbial and physical bleeding, they stayed. Despite the danger to themselves and their inability to help, they would not leave Jesus' side. In their rabbi's agony, they remained actively present. Each woman had witnessed the kindness, compassion, and grace of Jesus. They were no stranger to his miracles or might. But in the dark of that day, their hopes faded, along with the life of the man on that wooden cross. I can't imagine anyone would have judged them for leaving his side. But that wasn't who they were. Before they were women of the resurrection, they were women unafraid of standing with Jesus in his darkest hour at Golgotha. Although Sunday morning was around the corner, Friday first took a heavy toll. The women at the cross weren't afraid of remaining present, of feeling every sorrow-laden emotion as Jesus suffered and died. I vividly remember lying on the floor next to a friend whose father died in a freak accident, my arm resting on her back as she let out guttural screams. I willed myself not to say a word, but simply remained by her side. When my closest friend of 20 years anticipated the upcoming nuptials between her ex-husband and his new fiancé, I laid next to her as she fell asleep, my presence a reminder she wasn't alone on the night of his wedding. When a dear friend miscarried in her second trimester of pregnancy, my only offering was arms wrapped around her shoulders as she wept. The practice of simply being present versus attempting to pacify the pain of others acknowledges our helplessness to assuage their suffering. It's emotionally, mentally, and physically taxing, yet honors the personhood of another. While encouraging words have their place, Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 7 tells us there is a time to be silent and a time to speak, and I felt my physical presence was the best comfort I could offer. Staying present is indeed a holy act that forms us into the likeness of Christ. Former professor of pastoral care at Fuller Theological Seminary, David Osberger, shares, presence is not a method. It is embodying grace, incarnating love. It is fleshing out the steadfast love of God. He continues, out of our experience of God's faithfulness, we learn how to be faithful to one another in our willingness to be present with all our vulnerabilities. Our presence to one another mediates God's presence to us. The abiding certainty of God's presence is not and cannot be a substitute for our presence. Being the face of God to each other. God's compassionate presence is mediated in the caring presence of God's people. Just as we know that nothing, pain, suffering, even death, can separate us from the compassionate love of God, so we stubbornly refuse to let anything intervene in our presence with those who suffer. We serve as the proxy for divine comfort and care when we remain actively present in a cruel world overcome by harm and loss. The late theologian Wilbert Schenck once wrote, "We are not free to choose or reject a theology of presence. Presence as incarnation is fundamental to all witness. Our embodied presence may be the only Jesus others encounter, and our life in Christ blossoms as we root ourselves in the here and now, being vulnerable alongside of others." As the women at the cross remained actively present, may we remain present to those precious to us in times of tragedy. May we recognize, as the Apostle Paul did, that to live is Christ. Philippians chapter 1, verse 21. I pray that those we encounter meet the kind, compassionate, and caring Christ within us. May we humanize and honor the personhood of another while recognizing how near and actively present the divine is to us. Prayer. God of the present women, give me energy to be present for others. God, who is endlessly present with us, I take comfort in your nearness. Declaration. I will practice active presence with beloved image bearers. I receive the kind and comforting presence from the one who loves me. Questions to ponder. In what situations or relationships do you struggle to stay actively present? Who has offered you active presence? How has that shaped your understanding of self, of the divine? 3. Know Better, Do Better by Patricia A. Taylor. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Micah chapter 6, verse 8. When we know better, we do better. This idea doesn't depend or change based on our personality, on what we have or don't have, or on our place in space, nor should it. As followers of Jesus, we evolve, we grow, we act justly, love mercy, and humbly journey with our God. We don't finish where we started, and we can find ourselves immersed in the grand story of redemption along the way. Jean Wiley understood this and unapologetically set out to make a positive impact in her community. Born in 1942 and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, Jean was a brilliant civil rights activist who began her storied career of leadership and change as a young student at Morgan State College, now Morgan State University, in Baltimore when the sit-ins began in 1960. When speaking of her participation in the sit-ins at age 17, she stated that they seemed like the perfect thing to do, so she, along with many other students from fellow Black colleges and universities, jumped right in. She later became involved with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and the Northern Student Movement, NSM, while she continued her activism as a faculty member at Tuskegee Institute, now University in Alabama. She sought to expand minds to embrace possibility, and her house became a crash pad for SNCC activists who passed through town on their way to their next organizing event. It was here that she taught the likes of Sammy Young Jr. and Ruby Sales, and she was just getting started. Participating in this movement came with subjection to constant hostility, arrests, and threats against the lives of those who dared to march, protest, and organize. There was the real possibility of being murdered for insisting that Black lives deserve belonging in every space in society without recourse or repercussions. Even when violence was leveled against them, as with Young Jr., who was killed at the tender age of 21 for using the whites-only bathroom at a gas station in Tuskegee, Jean and others dedicated to the cause pressed on. Making progress for the greater good, even in the face of loss of life, takes a seemingly otherworldly level of commitment, fortitude, and belief. Yet Jean didn't seem to entertain lingering doubts or questions. She was acutely aware of what needed to be done and resolutely set out to do it. Jean was a witness to her own family struggle with segregation during her childhood. Her father was a painter, along with two of her uncles, and for 15 years they tried to gain entry into a labor union that would offer more opportunities and higher pay. Despite their efforts, they were categorically denied participation in a system that was structured to prevent Black individuals from gaining equal footing. As a daughter, she watched her father become worn down trying to fight injustice. As a Black woman, she took up the fight as her own. In an interview in 2001, Jean spoke of the lack of freedom of movement while living through segregation and how that affected her family and her psyche. "You can't," I grew up hearing. "You can't. You can't do this. You can't go to the symphony. You can't go to the library. You can't go to the swimming pool. You can't go to that park. No." With so many no's thrown in her direction everywhere she turned, she was yearning for a way to say yes to herself and yes to the fight for the freedom of Black people. This yes came when she was that young college student, not even of legal age, who participated in her first sit-in and thought, "Oh, but I can do something about this." The personal became political. Her own experiences formed her conviction that what her family and countless others faced was inhumane and immoral, and she acted with the belief that there had to be a better way. Over the span of her lifetime, Jean Wiley's work evolved and took her to different places and spaces. She held positions at the University of the District of Columbia, the Center for Black Education, and the University of California at Berkeley, to name a few. In these locations and others, she was a formative influence who passed on her fervor for justice to others. Under Jean's tutelage at Tuskegee Institute, Ruby Sales was first inspired by the writing of civil rights activist James Baldwin. Sales, a living legend of the civil rights movement, is now a nationally recognized human rights activist, a public theologian, and the founder and executive director of Spirit House Project. This nonprofit uses the arts, education, action, and research to bring diverse people together for the work of social and economic justice and spiritual formation. While we all have our own choices to make, one can't help but wonder at how the actions of one can influence the actions of many, and what we'd all be missing if Jean Wiley and so many of our matriarchs who fought for equality had chosen to sit on the sidelines instead. As a child, Jean was motivated by what she observed, and living in a segregated America as a Black female ensured she would have her own stories to tell. As a young person, she knew what she had to do. She knew when it was her time to jump right in. For those who are marginalized and live with experiences of oppression, there may at times be a clearly defined path as to how and when to jump into the fight, as there was with Jean. But acting in the name of what's just and right for all image bearers, as Micah chapter 6 verse 8 describes, is a mandate for all of us. Once we know better, it really is incumbent on each of us to do better. And in spite of whatever fears, hesitations, and obstacles lie before us, may we always carry the knowledge that God is with us in the doing. Prayer. God of Jean Wiley, may we seek to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly in your name. May we commit to jumping right in with our hands, feet, words, and actions. May we believe that better is possible and act in ways to help our collective liberation and flourishing become a reality. Declaration. I will act not only for myself, but also for my neighbor. I do not have to experience oppression to fight for freedom for the oppressed. I am unshakable in my commitment to advocating for progress. I know that God is with me in the doing. Questions to ponder. What steps have you taken to be an active participant in the flourishing of your neighborhood and community? What is your strategy to stay engaged when you are feeling weary? If you have not taken any steps, what plans can you make today to get started? 4. Mothers of the Movement. God has blessed you above all women. Luke chapter 1, verse 42, New Living Translation. In our journey of faith, we'd be wise to remember that our whole being, our whole story, is considered and cared for by the divine. We are treasured, and we needn't divide our loyalties to walk in the will of God. Our whole self is welcome. Mary knew this. The years of waiting were over. The cries and anguish from all God's creatures had not been ignored, and a redemption plan was in motion. But it wouldn't take place without the active, embodied participation of a woman who was willing to become a mother. Neither a queen nor a duchess was chosen for the role, not a war hero or ancient celebrity. Amid political unrest, rampant poverty, and a refugee crisis in Palestine, a teenage girl from the other side of the tracks was handpicked by the divine to carry liberation by way of her womb. Mary's consent to the assignment of heaven bore potential real-world ramifications of harm. First-century law stated that whether betrothed or married, those found guilty of adultery were subject to death. Never mind that sexual assault was commonplace in the ancient world, where women possessed minimal rights. Women held...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?